Good morning. Hello. We're going to get started. Can I get everyone's attention up here? Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. How was yesterday? Awesome. Well, I personally had a great day. I looked around the room and it seemed like a lot of people were making connections and having an awesome day as well. So we were just so happy to see that. We have a fabulous program lined up for you today. And in a minute, I'm going to give you a few quick highlights. But first, I want to turn it over to my friends in third year Herber, second year MBA, Maddie Parrish, to do our land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maddie Parrish, and as Sarah mentioned, I'm a third-year dual degree student here in the Herb Institute at the University of Michigan. Go Blue, and welcome, everyone, all of our ClimateCAP friends. We're very excited to have you here. I'm also an Indigenous student here at Michigan Ross, and I'm very honored to give our land acknowledgement. I come from Battle Creek, Michigan, and I'm a member of the Nottawasepi Huron Band of the Potawatomi tribe. So it's part of the Anishinaabe people whose land we sit on today, and I'm very honored by my heritage and excited to share this land acknowledgement with you all today before we get our day started. Okay, so we recognize the university's origins through an 1817 land transfer from the Anishinaabe, the Three Fires people, which includes the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi people, as well as the Mashawwa, Kiasana, Fox people, the Peoria people, and the Wyandot people. The university stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. Learning at the university would not be possible without a legacy of colonization and coercive treaties that violently removed Indigenous peoples from their ancestral territories. In addition, our research on environmental science and sustainability has benefited and continues to benefit from access to land originally gained through the exploitation of its original stewards. Knowing where we live and work does not change the past, but understanding and acknowledging the history, the culture, and the impacts of colonial practices is an important step towards the creation of an equitable and sustainable future. Many Indigenous peoples call this land home, and we respect their connection to the space and commend their contributions to our research, education, and university. This is from our School for Environment and Sustainability, which I'm proud to represent, as well as the Ross School of Business, and we appreciate you all recognizing and honoring this acknowledgement today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddie. So like I said, I want to give you all a quick preview of what you can expect throughout the day today. After this morning's session, we're actually going to get you out of Robertson for a little bit for some smaller breakout sessions. If you haven't selected which panels you're attending yet, please check out your options in the Whova app. I also want to take a minute to call out our lunch blocks for today, which is something I've been really excited for. We're going to break up into two groups for a lunch and learn with recent MBA grads working in climate-related jobs. So can you all please take a moment now to open up your Whova app and add one of the two lunch options to your agenda? This will help ensure that we don't have capacity issues. I will actually give you 30 seconds to do that right now. You can look up at me when you're done. I'll also add that both options are very similar to each other. We just split it into two for capacity issues in the room, so you don't need to take a ton of time to like read through. And we just want to make sure that everybody knows where they're going for lunch. All right, let's continue. This afternoon, we're really excited about some interactive sessions that I think you'll find really interesting. We have the Builders Showcase that will be going on in the Winter Garden, and then we have 2 live case sessions that both still have capacity in them. The live cases will be led by a startup founder who will walk you through a real business problem that they're facing, and they'll be seeking your input and kind of walking you through how they're making decisions. So I think if you haven't signed up for any of the interactive sessions this afternoon, those 2 would be really, really great. And then finally this evening, we will close out the summit with our dinner in the award-winning football team's Michigan Stadium at the Big House. And I'm sorry to the UW friends in the room, but it's a pretty cool space. I used to live in Seattle, so I have tiny bit of allegiance there. But first, I cannot wait to welcome this morning's speaker. Donnel, you may not know this, but you were the very first speaker we not only reached out to for this conference, but you were the first speaker we had confirmed. So I think it's a bit of an understatement to say that at least the co-chairs have been particularly excited for this session. With that, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome our keynote for this morning, Donnel Baird, and moderator Mark Milstein.
Cool. You get your choice. What do you want? Take the center stage. No, you got to take the center. Oh, yeah. Okay. You had choices, but you didn't really have choices. Good morning. All right, good. Everybody was sitting so silent. We want to make sure you got some energy this morning. Heard it was a very nice night at the Brown Jug last night and maybe some other places. So we appreciate anybody who has shown up today. Very excited to have Donnel here. As some of you may know, CEO and founder of BlocPower. Just really quick, I am clinical professor at Cornell University, but I've got allegiances that are a little split because I have 3 degrees from this university, including the program, what is now called ERB, but what used to be called the Kemp program. So it's nice to be back home here, and I appreciate the organizers asking me to sit down with you today. So let's get into it. We got like a half hour to have some conversation. We're going to turn it over to you all to do questions. So as we're going along, if you have questions, make sure you go into the app and post them there. But let's start with some basic stuff. The theme of this conference has 3 components to it: urgency, opportunities, and recentering equity. Let's go with opportunity for a second. So tell us a little bit about yourself and BlocPower itself. What does it do? How did you get there? Give us a little bit of background and story so folks know.
Sure. So morning, everybody. I'm Donnel. I first visited Ross when I was an MBA at Columbia, and there's a case competition here about sustainability. We were talking, it actually was a natural gas company that sponsored it. And the question was, what should we do to improve fracking?
So the quick answer to that.
So the professor and I were saying, just fucking go bankrupt, shut yourself down. just stop. But it's good to be back in Michigan. I love coming to Michigan, and the lieutenant governor here who's coming in, I think at 6 o'clock, Garland Gilchrist, is a good buddy of mine, and just love being here. So I started BlocPower coming out of B school 10 years ago. Halfway, between the summer of first and second year, launched the company on LegalZoom.com. Paid $200 to formalize my LLC.
It does work.
Yeah, it does. And we have to make some adjustments later on, but that was a good start. And we focus on greening and electrifying buildings. And so our view, bluntly, put all the stuff about Elon Musk aside, when you look at Tesla and the electric vehicle industry, they've figured out basically how to remove the fossil fuel engine and technology from vehicles and replace it with smart, modern, all-electric equipment. And we now can do the same thing for all 125 million buildings across America. There's fossil fuel equipment for cooking, for hot water, for air conditioning, for heating. It's actually 30% of emissions of America comes from buildings using fossil fuels. And so we can remove all of that equipment and replace it with smart, modern, all-electric hardware. And then the electricity that we use to power that equipment can come from wind, solar, hydroelectric power. And so to us, it's not a moonshot in terms of new technology or do we have to invent nuclear fission. These are real estate assets. They exist. They use fossil fuels now. we can shift and transition and retrofit them to using green electricity for their power, and that's going to have a significant impact on the emissions profile of America. So what BlocPower does is we go building to building and electrify buildings. And more recently, we've started to sign contracts with cities like Ithaca, where you live, where the cities have passed laws that they want to be net zero by the year 2030. And so we're the only company that was crazy enough to sign up for that contract to electrify every single building in the city of Ithaca. There's 6,000 of them. And we're going to go building to building and try to make as many of them as close to net zero as we can by the year 2030. And so there's several contracts like that across the country. We're in about 40 cities now, and several cities, like Menlo Park, San Jose, Ithaca, Atlanta, Denver, Chicago, have really aggressive net zero goals. And we need to do our best to try to implement and hit those goals and achieve those targets.
So that's great, giving us a sense of the company itself. Let's go backwards a little bit around the opportunities. So now, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, recognized as one of the most innovative companies by Fast Company. I think you've gotten a lot of accolades yourself as a leader, but you don't come from a traditional business background. You didn't have a lot of entrepreneurial startups prior to BlocPower. What were you doing? How did you get to that opportunity in the marketplace?
Yeah. When I went to business school, I didn't even know what revenue was. And when people talk about equity, like you guys are using it this morning, I thought about like social justice and equity. I didn't think about like ownership of stock. And so I had a really steep learning curve when I entered business school. I was a community organizer before that. I was working for the same people that Barack Obama had worked for, 25 years before in Chicago. I was in New York and was trained by them to talk to faith leaders and houses of worship, synagogues, churches, mosques, temples, and labor unions to try to build a community coalition of folks who wanted to advocate for better housing, better schools. And that's what I did after I graduated from Duke for several years. And then, my community organizing supervisor said, look, this guy Barack, we don't know if we like him or believe in him, but he's a senator now and he's running for president, and they're looking for organizers. You should check it out. And so I drove to Illinois from New York. I met with him while he was a senator and actually thought that he would make a great vice president to Hillary. That was my calculation at the time.
Every idea can't be a winner.
That's right. I was like, if we can just win South Carolina, then he can be vice president to Hillary. But of course we won. And they asked me what I wanted to do after, what kind of role I wanted to take on in the administration. I knew I wasn't really a government guy. I'd actually spent 10 years, fighting local governments as a community organizer. And so took a job with a coalition of labor unions that had $90 billion in their worker pension funds that they wanted to co-invest with $7 billion that Vice President Biden and President Obama had decided to invest in greening buildings as a part of the 2009 stimulus. So we had significant resources to try and create a green municipal bond market in 2009, 2010. You guys may or may not remember there was an economic collapse at the time, the Great Recession. And so one of the ways to get us out of that was to try and invest this $90 billion, and in particular to try to retrain and rehire the million construction workers who'd been laid off in the subprime mortgage crisis, in the housing collapse, retrain and rehire them to enter the green construction industry, boost unemployment, move the country off of oil from the Middle East while reducing emissions. So that was the kind of policy program that Vice President Biden and Obama put together. And so I helped to manage that as an outside kind of public-private partnership consultant for them for several years. It didn't work. And so I went to business school to try and figure out how to make it work. And that's how I ended up at BlocPower. I'm just really stubborn. This was my assignment back in 2009, and so I'm still working on it.
So if it didn't work then, why did you think sort of embodying it into entrepreneurial venture is going to make it work now?
I think when I was in B school, impact investing, it was a little bit before ESG. It was still just impact investing in 2010, 2011. that was where Wall Street was thinking about, like, how can we get to triple bottom line and quadruple bottom line investments? And there just seemed such an interest from the capital markets in investments that could reduce emissions, create jobs, improve community health. And I knew from my experience that greening buildings just was like a quintuple impact. Like, there's a foreign policy impact, there's a health impact, there's energy savings to the homeowner, you're increasing the real estate valuations. There's all these impacts on top of the financial returns. If you could just get the financial returns to work, I knew there'd be a ton of capital that'd be willing to enter the space. So that was the initial hypothesis. And the second hypothesis was, it actually came from my Silicon Valley investors. When I was graduating from B school, we won a contract from the US Department of Energy. I had to skip my final exam in one of my classes to go down to the White House because they were like...
Do that in your schools.
My professor actually failed me. Like, I actually failed a class in business school and had to do a makeup course in summer school in order to graduate with my class. It's really hard to fail a class in business school, as you know. It's like pass-fail. It's really hard. But I skipped the final exam, and I went down to the White House because they're like, well, are we really going to give this Department of Energy contract to this kid who's still in school? He put his company on LegalZoom.com. He has no employees. Like, please bring him in. Let's interview him and see if this makes sense. And so fortunately, we won the contract, but it required us to raise immediately $2 million of matching funds. And so we talked to all the impact and social impact and environmental impact investors we could, about 200 of them. No one invested a dime. And then we went out to Silicon Valley and met with Ben Horowitz, who's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, and helped invent cloud computing. And then we met with Mitch Kapor, who invented the first modern version of the spreadsheet at Lotus. And the two of them decided that they were going to invest. And from them, I learned that there were certain technological breakthroughs in machine learning, in cloud computing, and mobile computing as a platform that would allow us to green buildings using data as a foundation in a different way than we'd been able to do during the Obama administration. Most people didn't have iPhones. Now we all have iPhones with LiDAR cameras on them. And so there's just a dramatic difference in the kinds of data we can collect about the 125 million buildings across the country. And the data allows us to give capital markets a better picture of what they're investing in and what the carbon offsets will be, what the health impact will be, what the energy savings to each homeowner will be, what the impact on asset valuations will be. So it's actually the breakthrough in software and a little bit of hardware combined with capital markets that creates the kind of opportunity that we have now. And then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, which we can get into later. So that's the opportunity.
Yeah, let's talk about, there's sort of, looking at the company, there seems to be a pivot point about a year or so ago on the focus of the business. So let's focus on the first part of the business, which is not just the opportunity, but the recentering equity piece about putting marginalized, disenfranchised people, historically damaged communities at the center of the company's vision for who decarbonizes and who electrifies. They say, you're going to start a business on something that you're intimately familiar with the problem. So you have this experience at DOE, doesn't work out very well, and that's federal government. So there's quite a bit of distance between being in the federal government and working with a local community.
That's right.
And so, talk about that opportunity. How do you see that opportunity? How do you know more about that opportunity? How do you put that at the center?
I wasn't sure that BlocPower was going to be a good business opportunity. I thought that maybe BlocPower was going to be a nonprofit because it wasn't clear to me that the project development costs and the unit economics of the business weren't great initially. It's so hard and so expensive to go into low-income communities. It's such a risky investment to invest in subprime at a time when we just had a subprime mortgage collapse. Like, who wants to invest in a company that's going to invest dollars for green energy in subprime communities after we just had this giant global subprime collapse, right? So it wasn't clear to me that this was a great opportunity. And it wasn't clear to the first 200 investors I talked to who told me no. They were clear that it wasn't a good opportunity. I think in Silicon Valley, if you talk to some of the best investors or read what they say, they will tell you that the best ideas are ideas that like initially look really stupid, but as you dig deeper. So think about Airbnb. Like, they had a tough time raising capital too. Like, people are used to hotels. Like, who really wants to? I mean, Airbnb had a really difficult time because initially the idea of like putting an air mattress in your living room and renting it out to guests, that doesn't seem like a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, right? So some of the best ideas don't correlate with what seems like a good idea initially, and it turns out that BlocPower was one of those. And the reason is the size of our market. For better or worse, there's tens of millions of buildings across America that are in financially underserved communities that have difficulty accessing capital, that are hyper neglected, and they overconsume energy per square foot. And my energy bill is less than a percentage of my income. So it's yours. If you go into a low-income community, their energy costs can be 20%, 30% of their entire income. So there's more value when you show up and say like, hey, I can cut your energy costs by 50%. That matters, right? It may be like 0.01% of our budget, but for a pastor that's spending $120,000 a year on energy from a $300,000 budget of revenue, that's a significant. And so energy is a pain point in low-income communities. And it turns out that it's a pain point for the energy utilities that supply energy to those utilities. Not only are the buildings neglected and underinvested in, the electricity and fossil fuel grid that serves those buildings is also neglected and deteriorating. It's gonna need to be upgraded, or else the entire energy grid of the US is going down. So you look at what's happening in Texas, where like every other winter, it freezes and stuff's terrible. Or you look at California, where there's wildfires due to the energy grid. And so the opportunity is in part the neglected real estate assets, the pain points for the customers, and the fact that the energy utilities must start to make investments in smarter, more distributed grids, or else they're going to become obsolete. And so when you think about all of those things in context, then the work becomes, can you put together a sales cycle and a project economics plan that allows you to engage the different stakeholders in transactions to green buildings that are profitable. And so part of what we have to do is actually be B2B2C, that we sell to the government of Ithaca, that we sell to the energy utility, we get data from them, it lowers our customer acquisition costs, and then we go sell to individual homeowners. And we have to be targeted about which homeowners make sense to sell to, in what order, and so that B2B2C model has really helped us.
How hard is it to overcome the issues that you have when you go into those communities, because you're still coming in as an outsider? You're talking about decarbonization, electrification, which where spend time at a university, very smart people don't understand what it is that actually means. And you're talking about going into people's homes, which is invading personal space. Mm-hmm. How do you bridge that trust to get folks to be comfortable enough with what you're talking about, with coming into the home and doing that as outsiders to a community, even if you're working with local government?
So one of the things that you learn as a community organizer that they actually don't teach in business school is that you actually have to be thoughtful about not showing up as an outsider. And so that's figuring out how to fit into the cultural norms of the transaction or set of stakeholders that you're dealing with is really important. So for example, I went to Columbia Business School. We were taught to wear jeans and navy blue blazers. We were like Ivy Leaguers, but cool, Wall Street, but not too, like, that was kind of our thing. Yeah, like you, exactly like you. So when you go out to Silicon Valley, you can't dress like this, right? If you're not wearing a sweatshirt and a Patagonia vest, you're an outsider. You don't look like a Silicon Valley founder. You look like an Ivy League asshole from the East Coast.
My degrees are from public schools. I only teach
Present
in the
company
Ivy League.
excluded.
I only teach there.
You look fantastic.
Thank you.
But so I was showing up with my like blue blazer from Theory, the sample sale, and my jeans, and you know, one of the investors, I think it was Andreessen Horowitz, they're like, look, we got some feedback for you. Like, you can't wear a blazer when you come out to pitch investors in Silicon Valley. Maybe that's what you guys do in New York, but when you do it here, you're telling everyone that you don't know how the game is played, you're an outsider, and so you're gonna need to like adjust. Okay, so when we go into low-income communities, it's obviously much more complicated than how you dress or what you sound like, particularly in communities where there's been decades or centuries of disinvestment and disenfranchisement, just kind of unfair treatment, people not following through on contracts, people lying. So there's lots of ways to build trust or to be thoughtful about it. We spend a lot of time on what we call community advisory boards, where we convene trusted local leaders like a local rabbi, but the principal of a local high school, or the executive director of a nonprofit that provides medical services to folks. They're trusted because they're leaders, they live in their community, it's their community. So we don't come into the community, it's their community. We have an advisory board in Ithaca that's composed of local leaders who live in Ithaca and have worked there for decades, and they tell us what to do, and the trust is built because we listen, right? And we're patient, and we don't get out ahead of them. So that's one part. The second part is, I fundamentally believe that, and when you look at the Yale climate communication studies, right, and like 50% of Americans are alarmed about climate change, and we goddamn well should be, like, but neurologically, it's still hard for all of us to figure out how to translate our alarm into day-to-day actions, right? And the human brain, it just isn't wired that way. We don't spend a lot of time talking to customers about climate change at all. We tell customers, you have fossil fuel gas in your home, you cook with it, you heat hot water with it, you provide heating and air conditioning with it. Even when it's not running, it releases methane, it releases benzene, it releases nitrogen dioxide. The nitrogen dioxide is the reason that 13% of kids in America have chronic asthma. The methane will totally kill you. The benzene will totally give you cancer. That's what you're breathing in. And your energy costs are really high. Do you really want to replace your broken down furnace with like another 30 years of broken down stuff? And here's a package of free money from the utility or from President Biden to help you make this conversion. That is what we talk about. So what's important to them in their space? Climate is important on the left side of their brain, but figuring out how to make that emotional connection to meet building owners where they are in terms of their family and the things that are most important and most sacred to them, that's how we sell. So we don't talk to these communities about climate change. We talk to them about economic development, increasing the value of their homes, increasing the health and safety and wellness of their kitchens and their facilities and furnaces, and how to improve their life overall. And oh, by the way, it happens to be good for the planet. People feel really good about that.
Yeah, I want to do one more. That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to do one more piece on opportunity, and then let's go to the urgency section since we've covered the equity and opportunities. But the opportunity section is the pivot that you made like a year ago, right? And you've mentioned it a little bit about getting into more of the software side. I mean, that's where there's a lot of investment going on now.
Yeah.
What made you pivot there? Could you talk about how you went from this more focus on the hardware side to the software side of the business?
Well, we're not bullshitters. I mean, when we signed the contract in Ithaca, we had to take a hard look at, all right, we are going to make a serious attempt to green every building in this city. What will be required? Well, clearly one company can't pull that off, and neither can a local government. It's going to take a really broad range. So you actually need a platform on which other people can build applications, and you need a data platform. And so we spent a lot of time, and fortunately Jeff Bezos gave us $5 million of Amazon stock, which immediately fell by 20%. And I totally panicked.
Thanks for the gift.
I got this like letter. It's like, here's a transfer of stock, Jeff Bezos. And I was like, what am I supposed to sell this stock? I totally was. I waited a week. It dropped by 20%. So it was a $5 million grant, but it was a $4 million grant by the time I sold the stock. But we used that capital from Bezos to build a data model of all 125 million buildings in America. We bought building data from Microsoft, from Zillow, from the US federal government. There's a team during the Trump administration in Tennessee. They like hid out in the national laboratories, kept their heads down, and they like collected satellite data and Google Street View car data and like combined it into this awesome data set. So we bought that data set and we put it in a giant data platform in our nonprofit, and it's available for all of you and your universities to use. But that data platform allows us to come up with a specific plan to decarbonize every single building in Ithaca and every single building in the country. And we thought that if we were going to be serious,
that's 125 million buildings.
Yeah, but if we're going to be serious about net zero across 125 million buildings, or 6,000 buildings in Ithaca by 2030, or 11,000 buildings in Menlo Park by 2030, then we had to present each homeowner with a specific plan of what it was going to take to actually take their building to net zero. And so we spent 18 months investing in that and building out that machine learning platform to make those recommendations to all 125 million buildings, which is now available for the country. And so the good thing for me is, like, let's say we can't raise our next round of capital and BlocPower goes bankrupt. This data model is open source. It's available. You guys, as the next generation of MBAs, can like pick it up and continue the march towards reducing emissions. And so we thought that was important, and that's the investment that we made.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I want to take a few minutes to talk urgency, right? So because it's a big part of the vision that the organizers for this conference had this year. And let's use Ithaca as an example, since I'm familiar with it and you guys are there. The commitment, so I think I was at COP26, that was in Glasgow, when it got announced that City of Ithaca was doing their Ithaca Green New Deal. They were going to decarbonize and electrify all 6,000 buildings, which is certainly smaller than 125 million. By the time that's announced in 2022, I think it was, we're talking something like 750 buildings a year must be done in order to hit the 2030 goal. Because it's not just decarbonizing, electrifying 6,000 buildings, it's doing it by 2030. Fast forward now, and last week, Ithaca puts out a press release saying we've got the first 11 buildings that are either underway or have been done. So even if there's a year of ramp up and then we go, that's 750 buildings a year, now we're 6 years short. So now we're at like 1,000 buildings a year and we have 11.
That's right.
How do we ramp this up? The urgency seems to be there. Pushing beyond 2030 seems to be problematic for the globe. How do we solve this? What role does a company like BlocPower play?
Well, boy, is that a good question. How should I? It's a complicated question, so I'm going to try to walk through the different parts of the answer. I worked in presidential politics and community organizing politics. So I worked at the presidential level and also at the community level. In politics, the outcome is process. And one of the tough things that I had to learn as an MBA is like, the outcome is not process. The outcome is like the outcome, right? Like, did you hit your top line revenue? Did you hit net income? Like, that's the outcome. And like, no one cares about the process that you use, really, right? But in politics, process is the outcome. Because if you don't go through the correct process and you get to a right outcome or the wrong outcome, you will still suffer politically, right? It's just a different game. The Ithaca Green New Deal in particular was passed by a coalition of young people, all the young people at Cornell who registered and voted, and drove it through. There's a big left-wing coalition of Green New Deal activists who just don't believe in capitalism, fundamentally. And when they passed the Green New Deal, there's been this schism as to, should you implement the Ithaca Green New Deal using capitalism, or should we push for like government ownership of the energy utility system and have the government invest taxpayer dollars in that, and that kind of government ownership energy entity should deliver the Ithaca Green New Deal. So there's been this huge schism in Ithaca about that approach, and some of it is national. And so we decided that we were not going to be successful unless we were patient with that schism, because we could not lose the coalition and support of half of the people that supported the Ithaca Green New Deal. And so we spent a lot of time arguing and fighting and listening and learning about their perspective and trying to explain to them, yes, we have $100 million from Goldman Sachs. No, we're not going to use it to ransack Ithaca and exploit you guys and gentrify and steal money, right? There's pension funds that invest in Goldman Sachs and they want stable 4 or 5% returns that are fair and reasonable, and let's educate one another on our mutual expectations. So that was one part. How do you go through a political process so that we can start the Ithaca Green New Deal well? And that took a lot of time. The sustainability chief, who is the architect of the Ithaca Green New Plan, resigned, and you guys can Google it. He's pretty frustrated and upset with how things have gone, and there's a lot of people who support him who are pretty upset. So we needed some time for that to heal. In Ithaca, like all cities across America and all places across America and Europe, there's a generational shortage of skilled workers. Mm-hmm. There are not enough electricians, plumbers, mechanical engineers in America or Europe to implement any of the green infrastructure goals that we have, and that is the case in Ithaca. So we had to invent a workforce development program to go into low-income communities, train and hire ex-offenders or financially underserved people to become part of the workforce that Ithaca needs to green buildings. So that's all of the work that we had to do to lay a foundation for potential success in Ithaca. Now, we know, because we actually have greened thousands of buildings in Brooklyn, that greening buildings is actually not linear. It's actually not 1,000 buildings a year. It's actually a viral coefficient. Right. It's exponential. Mm-hmm. And so we know that anytime you green one building and do a great job of putting it on the local news, the neighbors of that green building, stakeholders who are going to be connected to that building, mm-hmm. come in. And that is an exponential growth curve, not a viral growth curve. And so in our initial project in Brooklyn, where we ended up greening 4,000 buildings in 3 years, we can actually send it to the organizers. You see this exponential growth curve where you do 10 buildings, and then all of a sudden it's 100, and then the year after that it's 1,000, and then the year after that it's actually 3,000 to 4,000. It becomes a logarithmic function. That's right. Okay. And then the last piece is we need the Inflation Reduction Act. Biden did a fantastic job passing the Inflation Reduction Act. It has $30,000 per home, per building, or per apartment unit to electrify buildings. And Ithaca needs that capital that grant capital in order to implement its Green New Deal. And morally, we cannot go into Ithaca and charge someone $100,000 to green their building when we know that if they wait 4 more months, it's only going to cost them $70,000. So we have to be transparent and say, look, it's actually going to be a better deal for you to wait for the IRA to come into play. And for a variety of reasons, the IRA has been delayed. So we expect to build up some significant momentum this year, and that's why I'm so excited about this year.
So 2 more questions, and then we'll turn it over to audience. So one is, as a business leader then, though, how much do you worry about how much you're trying to set a vision and aspiration out there to move people along, but at the same time you see the pendulum swing and people say, well, we're not hitting that vision, that aspiration, this is impossible, and they just walk away, and you lose motivation from whether it's the employees, whether it's your stakeholders. Do you worry about that, and how do you try to manage that?
I mean, that's a question about leadership. Mm-hmm. In many ways, I'm a crappy leader. Again, I had the advantage of learning a lot of early lessons about leadership as a 26-year-old senior staffer for Obama. When I joined the Obama campaign, we were 30 points behind in the polls. It was dark and gloomy. and miserable. But what happened was a generation, my generation of millennials, who had just survived 8 years of President Bush. We thought President Bush was going to be the worst president
Doesn't it seem quaint
we
now?
had ever
It's amazing.
seen.
Yeah.
Like, Chris Rock has this joke. He's like, he's the worst president of all time. I mean, like, presidents of PTAs. He's the worst president of any kind of president. Like, anyway, and we've learned that there's depths that we can go to. And maybe going back to again. So the question for all of us is like, what do you do in those kinds of situations? People, especially people who are concerned about climate, like, working in climate is not easy, right? Like, it is awesome. You have a mission, you have a purpose. You wake up every morning and go to sleep every night with a mission and a purpose. You're not like lost in the bowels of capitalism and what's your purpose. Like, you have a purpose, and that's why you guys are here, right? And so that is awesome and very rewarding. But it is difficult, right? Like, transactions take years. There are setbacks. Like, you lose a presidential election and you lose 4 years of momentum, or 6 years to recover. Like, it is difficult work. And so how do we all sustain the morale that we need? So part of that, I actually didn't study business in undergrad. During my time at Duke, I majored in Black studies. And I spent the majority of my time trying to figure out how African Americans ran the civil rights movement and how did they sustain their morale and hope after like 350 years of like oppression, where someone could get killed for registering to vote. How do you, in a few short years, build a national and global movement that can get Black people the right to vote, to elect a local sheriff who's going to protect them, to elect a president who's going to pass civil rights legislation through the Senate, and build? How do you do it? And a lot of it was training in nonviolent Gandhian practices. There was inspiration from Dr. King and so many others, but there was a lot of training. There was 18 months of workshopping with students in Nashville before they did their first sit-in to begin the sit-in movement, right? So there's 18 months of just like training and work that they did before they went to Woolworths and sat down and got the hamburger. And so what sustains you and what gives you hope in these kinds of environments? And so the third part, I guess the last part, is one of my favorite things about the Obama campaign, and it's really important to me because, well, I'll tell you, it takes a story. It's going to take a minute. During the Obama campaign, we used to have this saying, fired up, ready to go. Actually, we're going to do it now. I say fired up, you guys say we're fired up. And I say ready to go, then we say we're ready to go. Fired up.
Fired up.
Ready to go.
Ready to go.
Fired up.
Fired up.
Ready to go.
Ready to go.
Okay. I pass, fail. I fail you guys, but we'll come back to that. So Obama tells this story. Where does that saying come from? When I quit my job in Brooklyn and moved to South Carolina and joined the Obama campaign, they assigned me to the rural border of South Carolina and Georgia, a place called Greenwood, South Carolina. And the legend is that Obama had made a commitment in Chicago. He'd met the state senator from Greenwood, and she said, look, if you want my vote, if you want me to not vote for Hillary, you need to come visit me in Greenwood and ask for my vote. And he said, fine, I'll do it. And he had no idea where Greenwood was. So he flies from Chicago into Columbia, South Carolina, and Greenwood is 2.5 hours drive from Columbia. And so he gets up at 4 in the morning and goes to a van. It's like raining, he's wet, he's damp. He gets in the van, he drives 2.5 hours, and he gets there for a 7 o'clock breakfast meeting. And everybody in the meeting is like late, wet, miserable. There's only 10 people there. He's like, I'm on the cover of Newsweek magazine. There's only 10 people here. I came all this way. This is terrible. And so a voice from the back of the room, it's a city councilwoman, Edith Childs. She says, fired up. And everybody in the room, all 12 people say, fired up. She's like, ready to go. And everybody's like, yeah, we're ready to go. Fired up. Yeah, we're fired up. Ready to go. We're ready to go. And Obama says, yeah, I was miserable. Then I started feeling kind of fired up.
Yeah.
I started feeling ready to go. So part of it is the connectivity and interpersonal relationships between us and you guys together as a generation that is making a decision that you're going to be hope. Hope is a discipline. It is a practice, right? It is and it is reinforced by the personal relationships that you guys have with one another so that you can pick each other up when someone's feeling down and keep pushing forward. Like, I can tell you, I've met presidents, senators, CEOs. I talked to Larry Fink on the streets of Davos and scared the shit out of him because he thought I was a protester. I wasn't. And I've been in these back rooms with these guys. There is no plan on climate. I've talked to the senators and asked them, there is no plan. Like, you guys are going to have to do it. Like, we will have to do it, right? And so the last part is when you have children, you have to have hope. I have 2 kids. Many of you may not have children yet, but when you do, and you have nieces and nephews, hope is not a hope. There's no choice. You have to be hopeful. You have to practice that. We're not fired up. The MAGA people, they're fired up. Mm-hmm. We're not fired up. But we got to get fired up. And it's on all of us to figure out how to take next steps and lead and pick each other up in this moment. Because 2024 has got to be our time. Is that helpful?
It's really helpful. I'm going to, on that note, I'm not going to ask my last question. That's great. Good? Now you're subjected to the audience.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to represent our friends here. Okay, so I think we just have time for one question. From people looking for some career advice. Hindsight being 2020, what is your take on founding a company out of your MBA instead of trying to get hired by an existing firm? What is your pro-con list for MBAs thinking about climate-focused entrepreneurship after graduation?
That's a tricky question. I'm gonna try to be really thoughtful with my answer. I thought that, especially as a community organizer who had no background in business and literally did not know what stock or equity or revenue was, I thought that I needed to go work for a consulting firm or become a product manager at a company so that I could be trained, or like go work for GE in their executive training program. And I probably did need to do that. I would probably have been a better business leader early on. So that's one part. But that's really safe and conservative. Like, in Silicon Valley, they don't like MBAs at all. Like, they kind of think we're all over the hill and old and too conservative, right? And so what kind of business are you starting? If you want to start a venture-backed company, the very premise of that question means that you're probably not ready to start your company. So why did I not go into consulting and get myself trained in a proper business program? Is because the idea of BlocPower became so important to me that I would like wake up in the middle of the night angry because it just seems so wasteful and ridiculous that 30% of emissions is like cooking the planet from buildings. We have all the hardware we need. We have all the software we need. Wall Street's willing to provide the capital, but there's just these like inefficient and kind of incompetent, poorly structured transactions that are preventing us from reducing emissions and saving the planet. That became a real pain point for me as a human being. And so then the question actually became, could I survive 2 years of not working on this problem and instead going to be trained at like Siemens or GE? Like, could I even make it through that program? Or would I like be in my cubicle researching issues about green buildings and BlocPower when I was supposed to be doing my job, right? And so for any founder to build an organization and maintain it and recruit co-founders, recruit a team, recruit capital, recruit customers, there has to be an authentic problem and drive and solution. It is not clinical. You cannot put it in a spreadsheet. It has to come from someplace deeper inside you. Otherwise, entrepreneurship is just too difficult, right? So if you are an entrepreneur and there's a problem that you want to solve and it's a climate problem, we as climate entrepreneurs we will bend over backwards to get you in front of investors, to introduce you to customers, because your success is our success so that we can save the planet for our children. So if you want to come into the space and it's in you, there should be nothing holding you back from doing it. If you have doubts, we're human beings, we all have doubts. The premise of that question of getting more business training, the rate at which you are trained, the rate of learning when you run a startup is exponential. The problems that you solve in a week at a startup, contract negotiation, HR and management, leadership, you cannot learn at a faster pace than you are when you're in charge of a startup. And so the business education piece, I would say, have great advisors who have formal business education training, who you can call them at 11 o'clock and be like, I have this problem, I don't understand. I'm sorry to call you so late and wake you up, but like I really need help. And they will lend you their advice. And that is part of the superpower of being an MBA in climate, who's an entrepreneur. Everybody takes your call, everybody wants to help you, and so you can lean on that help. And so I would not suggest that training alone be the reason that someone not start a business, but I caution you that if you're asking that question, are you fired up enough? Are you ready to go enough on the problem that you want to commit your life to kind of take the leap? And that's a hard question that you got to look in the mirror and figure out. Is that?
I think that was great.
Trick answer.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys fired up?
Fired up.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Fired up?
Fired up.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Pass.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. One more hand. Yep. All right. Before everyone gets going, I just want to give you a quick preview of where you are going. We are finally splitting out of Robertson and getting you into smaller breakouts. You'll have a little bit of choice in the program. If you are going to the Folk to Know panel, that will be right here. It is 10 o'clock now. I am going to say panels will start at about 7 after, so grab a quick bathroom break if you need. Corporate political responsibility, you're going to be going into Blau, which is the next building over. The future of mobility and adaptation will both be upstairs. So take the stairs upstairs in Ross, right by the Starbucks. And then you'll see directions to those 2 classrooms. And please, lastly, guys, please take your garbage with you. There was a lot of trash left in here yesterday, and that's on our team to clean up. And there'll be a lot of sessions throughout here today. So please take your garbage with you. Thank you.